London 1839, when the first carriage bell echoed through the marble streets of Mayfair, Lady Eliza Hartley stepped into a life she had never agreed to belong to. The iron gates of Ravenscroft House did not open with welcome. They opened with memory. Cold stone pillars rose like judgment itself, and beyond them stood a mansion carved in black elegance, too grand to feel warm, too perfect to feel alive. Eliza sat rigidly inside the carriage, her gloved fingers folded over a small, embroidered trunk that held everything her life could be reduced to. Silk gloves, 2 mourning ribbons she had never worn, and a letter sealed with wax that had decided her fate. She did not cry. A lady of her standing never cried in public view, but her silence carried weight, heavy, deliberate, almost defiant. When the carriage stopped, the footman opened the door without meeting her eyes, as if even looking at her too long might be an intrusion into something fragile. "Lady Hartley," he said softly, as though the name itself was something that might break. She stepped down. The gravel beneath her shoes sounded too loud for a place that looked like it had forgotten joy. Above her, the mansion's windows watched, not welcoming, observing. Inside, the air changed. It was warmer, yes, but not kind. The heat of fireplaces that burned for duty, not comfort. The scent of polished wood, old books, and something faintly metallic, like time itself, had been left too long in one place. Servants moved like shadows trained to disappear. No one spoke above necessity. And then she heard it. A name whispered just once. "The Duke is not to be disturbed." As if he were not a man, but a storm contained behind doors. Lady Eliza Hartley had been married by contract 3 days ago. She had not met her husband until today. The Duke of Ravenscroft. A man spoken of in Parliament like a warning. A name that silenced conversations at dinner tables. A figure described as composed beyond humanity, disciplined, unreachable, untouched by sentiment. A man who had once loved and never recovered. That was all she knew, and perhaps all anyone dared to know. She was guided through corridors lined with ancestral portraits. Every face looked like it had learned how to endure. No smiles, no softness, only legacy. At the end of the hall, a tall door stood slightly ajar. The servant paused. "He will see you when he chooses," the woman said quietly, then left her alone as if solitude itself was part of the introduction. Eliza remained still. Then, with a breath that did not tremble, she entered. The chamber was vast. A library-styled sitting room attached to private quarters, lit by amber firelight that flickered against mahogany walls. Maps lay scattered across a desk, ink bottles half used, a violin case closed but not stored. And there, near the window, stood a man. He did not turn at first. Only the outline of him existed, tall, still, composed like carved marble refusing to soften. A white shirt hung loosely from his frame, sleeves rolled up carelessly to the forearms, revealing hands marked by ink and restraint rather than decoration. His posture suggested sleepless nights more than invitation. The Duke of Ravenscroft. When he finally turned, it was not with curiosity. It was with recognition of responsibility. His eyes met hers, and something in the room shifted, but not in a way either of them named. "You arrived," he said simply. Not a greeting. A fact. Eliza inclined her head. "I was sent." A pause. His gaze did not soften, but it lingered, just long enough to notice she did not look away. Most people did. She did not. That seemed to irritate something invisible in him, or awaken it. "You may choose your rooms," he said after a moment, voice controlled, measured, as if emotion was something he refused to let spill even accidentally. "The west wing is quieter." "I do not require quiet," she replied before she could stop herself. That earned the faintest stillness from him, a pause that lasted half a breath too long. "Then most do." "I am not most," she said. Silence, not hostile, but charged, like a match held too close to paper. He turned back toward the window, as if dismissing the exchange. "Dinner will be served at 8. You are not required to attend." "Am I not your wife?" she asked. The question landed, not sharp, but honest. For the first time, something flickered across his expression. Not surprise. Something older. Something heavier. Yes, he said quietly. On paper. That answer should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it explained everything. Eliza studied him, not boldly, but steadily, the way one looks at a locked door and wonders what sound it might make if opened. You live here alone, she said. I live here efficiently, he corrected. That is not the same. His jaw tightened slightly. It was the smallest sign of discomfort she had seen in him, and somehow that made him more human than any rumor ever had. A servant entered briefly, announcing tea. The moment broke. The Duke dismissed it without looking away from the window. When the door closed again, silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It had shape now, form, presence. Her presence. Hours passed in fragments. Eliza was shown to her chamber in the West Wing. The room was grand, draped in pale silk curtains that moved gently even without wind. A fire had been lit before her arrival, her trunk placed neatly at the foot of the bed. On the vanity stood a folded nightdress, modest by court standards, yet softer than anything she had owned before. Beside it, a brush, as if someone had expected her to exist here. Not just arrive, exist. When night deepened over Ravenscroft House, Eliza stood by her window. London glittered in the far distance, like a world pretending it did not know loneliness. Behind her, the estate remained awake in its own quiet way, and somewhere in its vast corridors, the Duke remained unseen, unspoken, unreachable, yet not absent, not entirely, because for the first time since she had entered this place, Eliza Hartley did not feel like a guest. She felt like something had noticed her arrival, and had not decided what to do with it yet. The night in Ravenscroft House did not fall, it settled, like something too heavy for the sky to hold for long. Candles burned low along the corridors, their flames steady but tired, as though even light here had learned restraint. Outside, London's distant noise softened into a memory of itself. Inside, the mansion breathed in silence that did not belong to sleep. Eliza did not sleep. She stood by her window in her night attire, simple, modest, the kind of Duke's household garment chosen for decorum rather than beauty. Her hair, loosened from its daytime structure, fell in a soft cascade down her shoulders, dark against pale fabric. She looked like someone between two worlds, and neither had fully claimed her yet. A knock came once, not repeated, not rushed, controlled. When she opened the door, a maid stood there with her gaze lowered. The Duke requests the study light be dimmed in the East Wing. He is working late. Eliza blinked slightly. Working, she asked. The maid hesitated, as if unsure whether such detail was permitted. Parliament papers, my lady. He has not left his study since dusk. Then, softer, almost unintentionally revealing, he forgets time when he is like this, as if time was something that obeyed him otherwise. And then the maid was gone. Eliza found herself walking the corridor before she had decided to. The mansion seemed to allow it. No one stopped her. No voice corrected her path. It was as if Ravenscroft House had been waiting to see where she would go when left uncommanded. Her footsteps softened on the carpeted hall, passing portraits that watched without judgment. Candlelight trembled in their frames, making painted eyes seem briefly alive. At the end of the eastern wing, she found a door slightly ajar. Light spilled through it like a secret unwilling to remain contained. Inside, the study was not quiet. It was alive with exhaustion. Books lay open in uneven stacks. Maps of trade routes and parliamentary districts covered the desk like a second skin. Ink stained the wood in places where thoughts had been pressed too hard, too long. And there, standing beside the desk, was the Duke. He had removed his coat. His shirt was still formal, but undone at the collar, sleeves rolled again to his forearms. The posture of a man who had forgotten he was supposed to be seen only in control. A single candle burned near him, casting sharp light across his face. And for the first time, Eliza saw him clearly. Not the legend, not the Duke, but the man beneath the name. He did not look up immediately. "You are awake," he said, as if her presence had already been accounted for somewhere in his calculations. "I could say the same," she replied. That made him pause. A fraction, Then he finally looked at her, and something in his gaze changed, not softened, not yet, but shifted, like a locked mechanism recognizing a different key. "You should not wander at this hour," he said. "I was not wandering," she answered calmly. "I was told you forget time." A faint exhale through his nose, almost amusement, almost irritation. "I do not forget it," he corrected. "I simply refuse to obey it." "That sounds exhausting," she said. A silence followed. This one longer. He leaned back slightly against the desk, studying her as if she were a problem that refused to stay simple. "You are not what I expected," he said at last. Eliza met his gaze. "Nor are you." That landed differently. He straightened a little, as if something inside him had been named without permission. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, the estate remained still. Inside, two people stood at opposite edges of something neither had defined yet. Then he turned slightly away, returning to the papers, though his attention no longer fully belonged to them. "You may return to your room," he said. "You will be more comfortable there." "I am not uncomfortable here," she replied. "You should be." That earned a quiet breath from her, almost a smile, but not quite. "You speak as though comfort is a privilege I must earn," she said. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. "I speak as someone who knows what it costs when people stay where they do not belong." The words shifted the air, not loud, but deep. Eliza's expression softened slightly, not with pity, but understanding that had no permission to exist yet. "You think I do not belong here," she said. "I think," he replied carefully, "that no one does." That was the first truth he had offered her. Unwrapped, unpolished, unprotected. A distant clock struck somewhere in the house. He did not react. But she saw it then, how stillness clung to him, not as peace, but as discipline. Like a man who had trained himself not to move toward anything that might leave again. Eliza stepped a little closer to the desk. Not enough to intrude. Enough to be present. "You work as if the world will collapse without you," she said quietly. "It will," he replied without hesitation. "And if you stopped?" That question lingered, longer than either expected. For the first time that night, something in him hesitated. Not in speech, in expression. "I do not stop," he said finally. A simple statement. A boundary disguised as identity. But Eliza did not step back from it. Instead, she studied him, truly studied him now. Not the Duke who ruled rooms, but the man who never left them behind once he entered. "I heard," she said gently, "that you once loved someone." The air changed instantly. Not colder, sharply still. His hand paused over the papers, for a fraction of a second too long. Then he resumed writing. "You hear too much," he said. "No," she replied softly. "I think I hear just enough." The candle flickered, and in that flicker, something old passed across his face. Not spoken, not offered, but felt. A memory too heavy to sit comfortably in the present. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "Love," he said, "is not something I practice anymore." Eliza did not answer immediately, because she understood, in a way she did not expect to, that this was not a refusal. It was a wound speaking in certainty. She took a step back then, not away from him, but away from the edge of something neither of them were ready to name. "I see," she said simply, and there was no pity in it, only acknowledgement. That mattered more than he wanted it to. When she turned to leave, he spoke again, not loud, not commanding, just enough to stop her at the door. "You should sleep," he said. Eliza glanced back. "And you?" she asked. A pause. Longer this time. "I will remain here," he said. "As you always do," she replied softly. And for the first time, he did not correct her. The storm arrived without warning, not as a gentle change in weather, but as a decision made by the sky itself. By midnight, Ravenscroft House was wrapped in thunder and rain so heavy it struck the windows like impatient hands. Wind tore through the estate grounds, bending trees that had stood for generations. Lanterns outside flickered out one by one, surrendering to the violence of the night. Inside, the mansion felt smaller, not quieter, never quieter, but closer, as if every corridor had drawn in a breath and refused to release it. Eliza stood at her chamber window, watching lightning split the horizon over London's distant silhouette. She should have felt afraid. Instead, she felt suspended, as though the storm had pressed pause on the world, leaving only her thoughts to move. A knock came at her door. Not the maid, not a servant. A single knock, measured, deliberate. Before she could answer, the door opened. The Duke of Ravenscroft stepped inside. For a moment, he did not speak. He was still in his evening attire, though undone in ways she had not seen before. His collar was loosened. His sleeves rolled back from ink-stained hands. Rain had touched him at some point. His hair slightly damp, dark strands falling imperfectly across his forehead. He looked less like a ruler tonight, more like a man who had walked too far inside his own silence. Eliza did not move. Neither did he. The storm outside filled the space between them, roaring through glass and stone. "You should not be alone in storms," he said at last. It was not command. It was not formality. It was something quieter, unstable in its gentleness. "I have been alone in worse," she replied softly. That made him still, not because it was sharp, but because it was true. He stepped further into the room, just enough for the door to close behind him. The sound of it clicking shut felt heavier than intended. For the first time, there was no corridor between them, no servants, no distance to retreat into, only space and awareness. "You did not attend dinner," he said. "I was not invited," she replied. A pause. "I said you were not required," he corrected. "That is not the same thing," she answered. Another silence followed, but this one felt different, less like restraint, more like something being held carefully in place. Thunder cracked sharply overhead. Eliza turned slightly toward the window, but did not step away from him. "You came here because of the storm," she said. "I came," he corrected quietly, "because the estate is unsettled tonight." "That is not what I asked," she replied, a faint tightening in his jaw. Then, "I came because I did not want you to be alone in it." The words landed without ceremony, but they changed the air. Eliza looked at him then, truly, not as Duke, not as authority, but as the man who refused to leave a room once he entered it. "You are not accustomed to concern," she said gently. "I am not accustomed to expressing it," he replied. That honesty cost him something. She could see it in the way his hand flexed once at his side, like restraint fighting instinct. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm filled the silence again. Then he moved, not closer yet, but toward the chair near the hearth. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he looked at her as if weighing something invisible. "You are still planning to leave," he said. It was not a question. Eliza did not deny it. "I was," she said softly. That answer seemed to settle somewhere deep in him, not as relief, as inevitability. Another flash of lightning lit the room. In that brief light, the distance between them felt sharper. "Then you should go when the road's clear," he said. A pause. "But not tonight." Eliza frowned slightly. "Why not tonight?" He hesitated. "Just once." Then, "Because storms make people decide things they cannot undo." The words hung between them. Not dramatic, not poetic, simply true in the way truth sometimes arrives, without decoration. Eliza slowly turned from the window, fully now. "You speak as if I am a decision you are waiting to lose," she said. His gaze held hers. "I speak," he replied quietly, as someone who is already familiar with loss. A long silence followed, the kind that does not ask to be filled, only endured. Eliza crossed the room slowly, not toward him, but not away either, stopping near the edge of the hearth's light. "I do not wish to be another loss you prepare for," she said softly. Something shifted in his expression, not breaking, not softening entirely, but cracking just enough for light to enter. He looked away first. "A rare thing. I do not know how to keep people," he admitted. The confession was almost lost beneath thunder, but she heard it clearly. "I do not think people are meant to be kept," she replied. That made him glance back at her, a question in his eyes now, unspoken, unsteady, another roll of thunder. The house seemed to shiver with it. Eliza took a breath, not uncertain, but steady. "You live as if every connection ends in departure," she said. "That is because it does," he answered. Then perhaps, she said gently, you have only been holding the wrong kind of connections. Silence again. But this one was different. It did not separate them. It connected them. The Duke moved then. Not abruptly, but finally. He stepped closer, not into her space completely, but near enough that the air between them changed temperature. I have spent years, he said quietly, learning how not to feel the moment something matters. Eliza did not step back. And has it worked? She asked. A faint, almost imperceptible exhale from him. No, he admitted. That single word felt like something unlocking. Not a door. A life. Outside, the storm reached its peak, wind howling, rain striking like relentless time itself. Inside, everything slowed. Eliza looked up at him, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her voice. Then stop preparing for me to leave, she said softly. His gaze sharpened slightly, as if that suggestion was more dangerous than any political war. I cannot, he replied. Why? A pause. Long. Honest. Because this time he did not hide the truth behind control. Because I do not think I would survive it, he said. The room fell completely still. Even the storm seemed to hesitate. Eliza's expression softened, not in pity, but in understanding so precise it almost hurt. You are not asking me to stay, she said quietly. He did not deny it. She stepped closer then. Just one step. Not closing distance fully, but enough to change everything. Say properly, she said. His eyes narrowed slightly. A man unaccustomed to surrender, but not unwilling to learn it. The silence stretched. Then, stay, he said. A pause. Something deeper gathered in his voice now. Stay just one night before you leave me forever. The words did not echo. They settled, like something fragile finally placed down instead of carried. Eliza did not answer immediately. She simply looked at him, and, in that look, he was no longer the Duke who commanded rooms. He was the man standing inside one moment he could not control, waiting, not demanding, asking. Outside, thunder softened slightly, as if even the storm had begun to listen. Eliza stepped closer again, until the space between them was no longer distance, but choice. And for the first time in Ravenscroft House, silence did not feel like absence. It felt like possibility. Dawn did not arrive gently. It broke through the storm, like something refusing to be delayed any longer. The rain had softened into a slow, lingering drizzle that clung to the windows of Ravenscroft House. Outside, the gardens shimmered with wet silver light, every leaf trembling as if it had survived something it could not yet understand. Inside, the estate was quieter than it had ever been. Not empty, changed. Eliza stood by the tall window in the Duke's study. She had not returned to her chamber. Neither had she left the room. The night had stretched between them in ways neither had named, filled with silences that no longer felt like distance, and truths spoken too carefully to be undone. Her reflection in the glass looked different now, not transformed, but no longer uncertain. Her hair remained loose from the night, falling softly over her shoulders. The pale night dress she wore was simple, unadorned, yet somehow it no longer felt like something she had been given. It felt like something she had chosen to remain in. Behind her, the Duke stood near the desk. He had not slept. That much was obvious, not in exhaustion alone, but in the stillness of a man who had spent the night standing too close to something he once believed he could never survive. His shirt was no longer perfectly arranged. The collar remained open, sleeves rolled as they had been the night before. Ink still marked his hands, though he had not touched a document since the storm ended. He watched her, not as a duke assessing a situation, but as a man waiting for an ending he believed was inevitable. You should go before the household wakes fully, he said at last. His voice was steady, too steady, as if he had already rehearsed her absence. Eliza did not turn immediately. I am awake, she replied softly. That is not what I said. It is what you meant. A pause. He did not deny it. He stepped forward slightly, not close enough to pressure her, but close enough that the space between them remembered the night. You do not owe me anything, he said quietly. Eliza finally turned, and when she looked at him, there was no hesitation in her gaze now. I know, she said. That answer unsettled him more than defiance would have. A long silence followed. Outside, birds began to stir in the wet gardens. Inside, something more fragile stirred between them. I asked you to stay for one night, he said carefully. Not for more than that. I remember, she replied. His jaw tightened slightly. Then you are free to leave. The words were correct, controlled, expected, but they did not move her. Eliza stepped away from the window at last, slowly crossing the room. Not toward the door, toward him. Each step unhurried, certain. You speak of freedom as if it is something I must be released into, she said quietly. His gaze followed her. Is it not? He asked. Eliza stopped at a respectful distance, then shook her head once. No, she said softly. Not this time. That silence was different. It did not stretch. It deepened. The Duke studied her face, as if searching for the moment she might change her mind, as if he expected it to come. But it did not. You were meant to leave, he said finally. I was meant to arrive, she corrected gently. A faint tension crossed his expression. That is not the same thing. No, she agreed. It is not. The fire in the hearth shifted slightly, casting moving light across them both. Eliza lowered her voice. Do you know what I felt when I arrived here? She asked. He hesitated. No, he admitted. Silence, she said. A pause. Not the peaceful kind, she continued. The kind that teaches you not to speak too loudly because nothing answers you when you do. His expression changed subtly. Not surprise. Recognition. She took another step closer, still not invading his space, but closing the distance that fear had built. And then, she said softly, I met you. A flicker in his gaze. You did not speak much, she continued, but you listened like someone who had forgotten he was allowed to. His breath slowed slightly. And last night, she said, voice quieter now, you did not command me. You did not dismiss me. You asked. A pause. That is not what I do, he said. I know, she replied gently. And yet you did. The Duke looked away briefly, as if the truth was too unfamiliar to hold directly. I should not have, he said. Eliza tilted her head slightly. Why? A long pause. Because the answer did not belong to rules or titles. It belonged to fear. I do not keep people, he said again, quieter this time. I lose them. Eliza's expression softened, but not with sadness. With clarity. You are not holding people, she said. He looked back at her. You are holding the moment you lost them. Silence. Complete. Even the house seemed to pause within it. The Duke did not respond immediately. For once, there was nothing rehearsed in his expression, only stillness, and something fragile beneath it. Eliza stepped closer then, finally close enough that the space between them was no longer guarded, but still not touched. I am not her, she said softly. That sentence landed deeper than anything else. Not accusation, not comparison, release. His voice lowered. I never said you were, but you expected me to become her ending, she replied gently. His silence confirmed it more than words could have. A breath passed between them, slow, measured, real. Then Eliza spoke again. I did not leave last night, she said. His gaze sharpened slightly, a question forming there. She answered it before he could ask. Not because I had nowhere to go, she continued, but because I chose not to. That changed something, not dramatically, not visibly, but internally, like a locked mechanism recognizing it had no authority left. The Duke exhaled slowly, almost as if he had been holding that possibility away from himself for years. You are still free to leave, he said quietly. Eliza nodded once. I know. A pause. Then, I am not leaving. The words did not echo. They settled. The Duke stared at her for a long moment, as if waiting for the world to correct itself. It did not. Outside, light widened across the gardens, touching stone and glass alike. Inside, something unfamiliar began to exist. Not possession, not duty, choice. You do not say things like that lightly, he said finally. Eliza's gaze held steady. No, she agreed. I do not. A pause. I stayed through the night, she continued, and I am still here in the morning. His expression shifted slightly. Something almost unguarded, almost afraid. Why? He asked quietly. Eliza did not hesitate. Because, she said softly, for the first time since I arrived, this house did not feel like it was waiting for me to disappear. Silence. Then, it feels like it is learning me instead. The Duke did not speak. Not because he had nothing to say, but because everything he might have said no longer had control over what came next. He looked at her for a long moment, not as someone he expected to lose, but as someone who had already chosen not to be gone. Finally, very quietly, he spoke. You stayed. Eliza nodded. I did. Another pause. Then, and you are still here, he added. A faint, almost imperceptible softness touched her expression. Yes, she said. I am. Outside, the first full light of morning touched Ravenscroft House. Not as a judgment, not as an ending, but as something new learning how to begin.